A retired Navy SEAL thought the war was behind him until his German Shepherd froze at the edge of an old training zone. No map showed a house out there. No records admitted it existed. Yet, Rex stared at it like he'd been there before. That night, the dog heard a rhythm Ethan couldn't. Soft knocks, spaced like a forgotten signal from a mission no one was allowed to remember. By morning, they found the truth hidden under the floor. A child's room, wooden toys, and a drawing of a soldier beside a loyal dog. Then a note appeared, simple, desperate, and impossible to ignore. "We didn't leave. They forced us to disappear." Ethan didn't believe in signs, but he believed in Rex, and Rex was leading him straight into a buried secret. If you're ready to hear what they uncovered, please like and subscribe. Help this channel reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The cabin sat where the road gave up. Not ended. Roads never truly ended out here, but thinned into something more like memory than pavement. A suggestion of direction carved by tires that had passed and never bothered to return. The mountains of the Pacific Northwest rose in quiet layers around it, their silhouettes softened by mist and evergreen shadow. Mornings came cold even in early autumn, and silence had weight, pressing down like a held breath. Ethan Cole had chosen this place because it asked nothing of him. At 40, he carried his height the way men who had worn heavy packs for years often did: upright, balanced, economical. He stood just over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, his frame built for endurance rather than display. His body was dense with functional strength, muscle earned through repetition and survival rather than mirrors. The skin of his hands was rough, lightly scarred, the tan on his arms uneven from seasons spent under open sky. His hair was cut short in a tactical military style, the sides shaved close, the top kept neat and practical, dark brown threaded with early silver at the temples. A short stubble followed the line of his jaw, trimmed with care, not vanity. Discipline lingered long after uniforms were gone. His eyes, steel blue with a hint of gray, rarely rested. They scanned habitually, not with fear, but with awareness. War had taught him that danger didn't announce itself. It waited. Inside the cabin, life followed a rhythm stripped of excess. Wake before dawn, coffee black, gear check, even though there was no mission. Training runs through the trees, maintenance, silence. He owned little and needed less. No photographs on the walls, no music, no television. The past was not banned. It simply wasn't invited. The only constant was Rex. The German Shepherd moved with a quiet authority that mirrored Ethan's own. At 6 or 7 years old, Rex was fully grown, large and powerfully built, his body long and balanced, his chest deep, his back straight and strong. A black saddle of fur covered his back and shoulders, fading into warm tan along his legs, chest, and muzzle. His ears stood tall and alert, pivoting at the smallest disturbance, and his almond-shaped eyes, dark, intelligent, unwavering, observed the world with measured judgment. He wore a plain, dark collar, scuffed from years of use, and nothing else. Rex was not a pet. He was a presence. They moved through the forest together most mornings, the trail unofficial and known only through repetition. Pine needles softened their steps. Moss climbed rocks like quiet witnesses. Birds scattered and resettled. For the first mile, Rex stayed close, his gait steady, his tail relaxed. Then, without warning, he slowed. Ethan noticed immediately. Rex stopped near a stand of cedar, his body stiffening. His ears angled forward, then slightly back. He sniffed the air, once, twice, his posture shifting from calm to alert. Not aggressive, focused. "What is it?" Ethan asked quietly, more out of habit than expectation. Rex did not move. This had been happening more often lately. Not every walk, not predictably, only in certain pockets of the forest, where the trees grew older and the air felt heavier. Rex would hesitate, sometimes veering off the trail, sometimes freezing entirely, as if waiting for a command that never came. Ethan had learned to trust patterns, even when they made no sense yet. He rested a hand briefly on Rex's shoulder, feeling the tension there, the coiled readiness beneath the fur. After a moment, Rex exhaled and moved on, but he kept glancing back, as though the forest itself had shifted position when they weren't looking. Ethan told himself it was nothing. Animals reacted to things humans missed all the time. Scents, sounds, vibrations. He had trained alongside dogs long enough to know that instinct wasn't magic. It was information, processed faster than thought. Still, the unease lingered. Back at the cabin, the mail sat untouched on the rough wooden table where the postman left it once a week. Ethan sorted through it mechanically. Supplies invoice, utility notice, a folded letter with handwriting he recognized immediately. Martha Hale. He didn't open it right away. Martha had been a constant once, long before the cabin, before the mountains. In her mid-60s now, she had the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime standing beside hospital beds and refusing to collapse. Her hair, once dark, had faded to soft gray, usually pulled back in a practical knot. She had kind eyes, but they missed little. A former military nurse, she carried herself with quiet authority and a patience forged under pressure. When Ethan had been younger, too angry, too reckless, too alone, she had been there, not to fix him, to anchor him. Ethan poured another cup of coffee before opening the letter. The paper smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, a scent that pulled memory tight around his chest. Martha wrote plainly, without sentimentality. Her health was declining. She would be moving into assisted living soon. There were things she needed Ethan to know, things better said on paper. Halfway down the page, a single paragraph made his hand still. A property, former military land, decommissioned training grounds, scheduled for municipal liquidation. A place he hadn't thought about in years. Ethan folded the letter slowly. The room felt smaller than it had that morning. Rex, who had been lying near the door, lifted his head. He stood and crossed the room with deliberate steps, his nails clicking softly against the floorboards. He stopped in front of the table and stared at the envelope Ethan had just set down. His ears went forward. His body leaned in, nostrils flaring. Then, unexpectedly, he growled, low, controlled. Not fear, not aggression, protection. Ethan frowned. Rex placed one paw on the edge of the table, steady and insistent, his gaze locked on the handwritten address. His tail was rigid, his muscles taut, every line of his body signaling readiness. Easy, Ethan said, instinctively lowering his voice. Rex did not retreat. The air in the cabin felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ethan had seen this posture before, in the seconds before a breach, before contact, before everything changed. Rex wasn't reacting to a sound or a smell drifting in from outside. He was reacting to ink on paper. Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't believe in signs. War had cured him of superstition. But he believed in training, in instinct honed by experience, in the quiet intelligence of a dog who had never once failed to alert him when it mattered. He picked up the envelope again. Rex's growl stopped immediately, replaced by an unblinking stare. "You remember this?" Ethan said softly, not as a question. Rex didn't move, but his ears remained forward, his body angled toward the door, as if already preparing to leave. Outside, the forest stood unchanged. The mountains kept their silence. Nothing dramatic happened. No thunder, no vision, no voice from the dark. Just a man, a dog, and a place that refused to stay buried. Ethan folded the letter and slid it into his jacket pocket. He reached for his keys. He didn't know why he was going back. He didn't even know what he was expecting to find. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He trusted Rex, and Rex was telling him that something, somewhere, was still waiting. The road back into the mountains felt narrower than Ethan remembered, though he knew that was memory playing tricks on him. Asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to packed dirt, and finally to nothing that could reasonably be called a road at all. The forest closed in, tall evergreens leaning toward the path as if listening. Mist clung low between trunks, turning distance into something vague and uncertain. Ethan drove with both hands steady on the wheel, posture unchanged, eyes scanning instinctively, while Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, head high, ears forward, every sense tuned outward. Rex had been like this since they left the cabin, alert but not anxious, focused in a way that felt deliberate. His gaze fixed ahead, not on the road itself, but on the gaps between trees, the subtle breaks in the forest's pattern. Ethan had learned not to interrupt that focus. In the past, Rex's stillness had always meant one thing. Something was close, even if it could not yet be seen. They passed the last recognizable marker, an old rusted sign half swallowed by moss that once obosnached federal land. Beyond it, the world slipped quietly out of record. Ethan slowed, then stopped entirely when Rex shifted his weight and let out a short, sharp huff through his nose. Not a bark, a signal. "All right," Ethan murmured, easing the truck off what remained of the path. The engine fell silent. The forest answered with its own breath. They continued on foot, moving between trees along a route Rex seemed to recognize, though there was no visible trail. The dog navigated with confidence, choosing curves in the land rather than straight lines, favoring ridges over low ground, avoiding patches where the earth looked disturbed despite decades of regrowth. Ethan followed without question. His boots found purchase where Rex led him, as if the terrain itself remembered being used this way. The deeper they went, the more Ethan felt the sensation he hadn't been able to name earlier. A tightening behind the ribs, a sense of approaching something that existed just beyond permission. He had felt it before, years ago, standing outside briefing rooms where doors stayed closed and answers were not meant for him. The familiarity unsettled him more than fear ever could. It took nearly an hour before the forest opened, just enough to reveal the structure. At first, it looked like a trick of shadow, a break in the vertical order of trunks, something angular where nothing angular should be. Then the shape resolved, and Ethan stopped short. A house. Not a cabin, not a shack. A house, built of weathered wood that had faded to a dull gray, set back against a low rise of earth as though pressed there intentionally. Its roofline sagged slightly at the center, not from collapse, but age. The kind of slow surrender that came from being left alone rather than destroyed. Windows stared darkly through layers of dust and grime. The front door was closed, intact. Rex halted several feet from the threshold. He did not advance. He did not retreat. He stood squarely between Ethan and the door, body rigid, head level, tail low and still. The air around him seemed to sharpen. Ethan scanned the perimeter automatically. No tracks, no smoke, no sound of movement. The house radiated emptiness, yet it didn't feel abandoned in the way ruins usually did. There was order here, restraint, as if whatever had once lived inside had left deliberately, locking the door behind them. Rex let out another low growl, deeper this time, resonant in his chest. "You don't want me going in," Ethan said quietly. Rex's ears flicked back for half a second, then forward again. He did not move. Ethan circled slowly, maintaining distance, reading the dog's posture the way he once read terrain maps. This wasn't fear. It was refusal, a boundary drawn with instinct rather than teeth. Rex positioned himself again when Ethan neared the door, calmly, persistently, as though this had always been his assigned post. Time passed without announcement. Clouds shifted overhead. Light changed angles. Ethan sat on a fallen log, watching the house breathe in its own silence, watching Rex stand guard. Hours slipped by, and still Rex did not relax. It was then that something inside Ethan shifted. Not a memory, but a recognition. He had stood like this before, outside places he wasn't cleared to enter, holding a line that didn't exist on paper, places that never appeared in official logs. Temporary structures, safe zones, shelters that were meant to vanish once their purpose was served. Except this one hadn't vanished. The thought unsettled him more than he expected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out Martha's letter again, unfolding it carefully, smoothing the creases. The address she'd written wasn't exact, just a rough description, coordinates approximated from old records. He compared it to his surroundings, to the slope of land, the tree density, the way the earth rose behind the house like a shield. It matched. Rex shifted then, not away from the house, but closer to Ethan, brushing his shoulder lightly. A gesture so subtle, it might have been accidental if Ethan hadn't known better. The dog's eyes never left the door. That was when Ethan noticed it. A small, weathered marking carved into the wooden frame near the door's hinge, faded almost beyond recognition. Not graffiti, not decoration. A simple symbol, shallow but deliberate, partially obscured by time and lichen. Ethan crouched, heart ticking faster, and brushed it clean with his fingers. His breath caught. It wasn't a unit insignia. It wasn't a warning. It was a neutral mark used once, briefly, in operations that officially did not exist. A sign meant for those who knew where to look, indicating a protected site, temporary, disposable, forgotten. Rex's ears twitched sharply. He turned his head toward the trees behind them, eyes narrowing. Ethan followed his gaze, hand instinctively dropping to his side, fingers flexing as though reaching for equipment that was no longer there. The forest stood still. Too still. Someone's been here, Ethan said under his breath, not as certainty, but as instinct. Rex took one step forward, then stopped himself, planting his paws firmly. He did not pursue. He did not retreat. He waited. The moment passed. A bird called somewhere far off. The forest resumed its quiet. Ethan straightened slowly. He did not attempt the door again. He didn't need to. The house had already told him what it was. Not a mistake, not a remnant, but a deliberate omission. Something that had never belonged in any file. As the light began to fade, Ethan backed away, one step at a time. Rex did not turn until Ethan did, and even then, the dog walked backward several paces, eyes still locked on the house, as if memorizing it. They returned the way they came, the forest swallowing their path behind them. Neither of them looked back. Night came down early in the forest, not with drama, but with quiet certainty. The light thinned between the trees until shapes blurred into darker versions of themselves, and the house receded into a silhouette that seemed less like a structure and more like a pause in the landscape. Ethan made camp at a careful distance, far enough to keep the house in view, close enough to feel its presence. A small fire crackled low, controlled, its warmth practical rather than comforting. Rex lay near Ethan's boots, head resting on his paws, eyes open. Sleep did not come easily. Ethan had learned long ago that silence at night was rarely empty. It was layered, textured, full of sounds the untrained ear dismissed as nothing. Wind through needles, branches settling, the slow shift of earth cooling after sunset. He lay still, listening, cataloging, letting the forest reveal itself on its own terms. Rex's breathing was steady, slow, almost meditative. Then it stopped. Rex's head lifted abruptly. His ears snapped forward, muscles tightening in a way that pulled him instantly from rest into readiness. He did not bark. He did not growl. Instead, he rose and moved several steps away from the fire, standing rigid, angled toward the house. Ethan followed the motion with his eyes. A sound reached him then, faint enough that he might have dismissed it if Rex hadn't already reacted. A soft, hollow tap, followed by another. Not random, measured. The interval between them was too consistent to be natural. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Ethan's chest tightened. He sat up slowly, every sense narrowing toward the rhythm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. It was the kind of signal designed to travel just far enough to reach someone who was listening for it, and no one else. His mind reached backward through years of training, through nights crouched in foreign terrain, through briefings conducted in rooms without windows. He knew that pattern. It was an old contact signal, once used in operations where radios were unreliable or forbidden. A knock code meant to identify presence without revealing identity. A way to say, "I'm here," without saying anything at all. Rex took a step forward, then stopped, looking back at Ethan as if awaiting confirmation. His eyes reflected the firelight, dark and intent. "Easy," Ethan whispered, more to himself than the dog. The tapping came again, slightly closer now, or perhaps only clearer in the stillness. Tap, tap, pause. Ethan rose to his feet and moved toward the house, careful, deliberate. Rex stayed close but did not overtake him, matching his pace exactly. When they reached the door, the sound ceased. The silence that followed felt intentional. Ethan rested his palm briefly against the door, not pushing, just feeling. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, as though it had been insulated from the warmth of the day. He exhaled and tested the handle, locked as before. He didn't force it, not yet. Instead, he circled the structure again, this time closer, letting his flashlight skim across the walls. The beam caught on inconsistencies, places where the wood grain didn't quite align, seams that were too straight to be the result of age. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with recognition. Inside, the air carried a scent that didn't belong to abandonment. Beneath the must of old wood and dust was something sharper, metallic, clinical, a ghost of antiseptic that time hadn't entirely erased. Rex caught it too. He moved past Ethan, nose low, following the trace with unwavering focus. He stopped at the far wall, pressed his snout against the paneling, and inhaled deeply. His tail stilled. His ears angled back slightly, a posture Ethan had seen only a handful of times before. This wasn't threat response. It was memory. Ethan knelt and examined the wall more closely. The paneling shifted under pressure. Not loose, designed. He slid his fingers along the edge and found the hidden latch, disguised beneath a groove in the wood. The panel swung inward soundlessly, revealing a narrow gap. Beyond it, the floor dropped several inches, creating a shallow cavity reinforced with steel brackets. A raised floor. Ethan's throat went dry. He moved methodically now, opening one concealed space after another. False walls, reinforced corners, wiring channels that led nowhere obvious. Everything about the layout spoke of intention, of planning that went beyond shelter. This place hadn't been built to live in. It had been built to hide. At the center of the main room stood a large wooden wardrobe, its surface worn smooth by hands long gone. It was heavier than it looked. When Ethan attempted to shift it, it didn't budge. He crouched, shining his light downward, and felt a chill crawl up his spine. Industrial bolts anchored the wardrobe directly into the floor, not to keep it from tipping, to keep it from moving. Rex stood beside him now, body tense, eyes fixed on the space behind the wardrobe. His breathing had changed, shallow and controlled, as though he were bracing himself. Ethan reached out and rested a hand on Rex's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth there, the living certainty. "It's all right," he murmured. But he wasn't sure that was true. As he straightened, A sharp memory flared. Fragmented. Incomplete. A hallway too narrow. A door he wasn't allowed to open. The sound of a child coughing behind a wall. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only a dull ache behind his eyes. Ethan closed his eyes briefly and forced himself to breathe. That was when Rex did something unexpected. He turned away from the wardrobe and moved toward the corner of the room, lowering himself to the floor. He lay down with deliberate care, pressing his body close to the wall, head resting against the baseboard. It was a submissive posture, but not out of fear. It was the way trained dogs position themselves when instructed to guard something fragile. Ethan's breath caught. "Rex," he said softly. The dog did not respond. His eyes remained open, alert, fixed on the door. A wave of understanding washed over Ethan. Not complete, not articulate, but undeniable. This place wasn't just familiar to Rex. It had been his responsibility. Whatever had happened here, Rex had been part of it, not as a witness, but as a protector. The tapping returned then, faint but insistent, this time from beneath their feet. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Ethan froze. The sound did not come from outside. It came from below the raised floor. Rex's head lifted slightly, but he did not move from his position. His ears flicked once, acknowledging the sound, then settled again. He did not appear surprised. Ethan swallowed hard. The rational part of his mind scrambled for explanations. Thermal contraction, shifting supports, rodents, but none of them fit the pattern. None of them explained Rex's calm acceptance. The tapping stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space it left behind, heavier than before. Ethan stepped back slowly, heart pounding now, not with panic, but with the weight of what he was beginning to suspect. He was standing inside something that had been designed to disappear, a place that had succeeded, not because it was destroyed, but because no one had gone looking. Except Rex. He looked down at the dog, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, the unwavering focus in his eyes. "I don't remember," Ethan said quietly. "But you do." Rex did not look at him. He didn't need to. The house settled around them, wood creaking softly, as though acknowledging the truth of that statement. Outside, the forest remained indifferent, ancient, patient. Ethan knew then that whatever lay ahead was not something he could approach quickly. Some doors, once opened, could not be closed again. He turned off the flashlight and let the darkness reclaim the room. They would come back in the morning. For now, it was enough to know that the silence had a voice. And Rex had been listening all along. Morning light reached the house reluctantly, filtered through dense branches and a low ceiling of cloud that refused to lift. Ethan woke before dawn, as he always did, but this time there was no sense of routine, grounding him. The night had left its residue behind, questions without edges, sounds without source, and the steady, unsettling certainty that something below the floor had once depended on silence to survive. Rex was already awake. The German Shepherd sat near the wardrobe, posture alert but subdued, ears forward yet relaxed, as if standing watch over a sleeping child rather than guarding against a threat. His large frame filled the narrow space beside the wall, black and tan fur catching faint light from the single window. When Ethan met his gaze, Rex did not look away, but there was something different in his eyes now. Not vigilance, recognition. Ethan exhaled slowly and knelt by the wardrobe again. In daylight, the bolts anchoring it to the floor looked even more deliberate. Thick industrial steel, sunk deep into reinforced wood. Whoever had installed them hadn't been worried about theft. They had been worried about discovery. It took time to remove them. Ethan worked methodically, careful not to rush, muscles moving on memory rather than thought. Each turn of the wrench echoed too loudly in the quiet house, metal protesting as though disturbed from long obedience. Rex flinched at the first sharp sound, then settled, lowering himself to the floor and turning his head away, as if unwilling to watch. When the final bolt came free, the wardrobe shifted with a reluctant groan. Dust billowed up, carrying with it the stale scent of sealed air and something faintly sweet beneath it. Ethan braced his shoulder and pushed. The heavy furniture slid aside inch by inch, revealing a square outline cut cleanly into the floorboards. A hidden door. Ethan crouched, fingers tracing the seam. The craftsmanship was precise, the edges tight enough to disappear unless one knew exactly where to look. He found a recessed handle and pulled. The door resisted briefly, then gave way, opening into darkness. Cool air spilled upward, raising goose flesh along Ethan's arms. A narrow set of steps descended into the floor, steep and enclosed, their wood worn smooth by small feet rather than heavy boots. Ethan clicked on his flashlight and aimed it downward. The beam revealed walls lined with thick insulation and reinforced panels, designed not just to hide, but to muffle sound. Whatever this place was, it had been built to keep noise from escaping. Rex rose then, moving forward with hesitant steps. At the edge of the opening, he paused, ears flicking, body tense. Ethan held still, letting the dog decide. After a moment, Rex descended, slowly, carefully, his large frame seeming almost out of place on the narrow stairs. Ethan followed. The room at the bottom was smaller than he expected, but not cramped. The ceiling was low, forcing him to stoop slightly, and the air carried a dry stillness that suggested it had not been disturbed in years. His light swept across the space and came to rest on a bed. A child's bed. It was neatly made, the quilt tucked with care, its faded pattern softened by time rather than neglect. Beside it stood a small wooden nightstand, its edges rounded by use. Shelves lined one wall, holding wooden toys, blocks worn smooth, a carved horse missing one ear, a small truck with chipped paint. Against the far wall hung drawings taped carefully in place. One of them caught Ethan's breath. It showed a figure in uniform, broad-shouldered, standing beside a dog with pointed ears and a long tail. The proportions were uneven, the lines unsure, but the intent was unmistakable. A soldier, a dog. Together. Rex stepped fully into the room and stopped. His body lowered slowly until he lay on his side near the wall, back pressed close to it, head resting on the floor. His breathing deepened, uneven for the first time since Ethan had known him. A low sound escaped his throat, not a whine, not a growl, but something quieter, heavier. Grief, stripped of drama. Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't training behavior. This wasn't instinctive defense. This was mourning. He knelt beside Rex and rested a hand against his ribs, feeling the steady warmth there, the life that persisted. Rex did not look at him. His eyes were fixed on the bed. Ethan turned back to the room, heart pounding now, not with fear, but with a dawning weight that settled into his bones. This place hadn't been abandoned in a hurry. It had been maintained, cherished. Someone had cared deeply about what happened here. He moved toward the nightstand and opened its single drawer. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges but intact. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, as though written under pressure. If anyone finds this, please help us. We didn't leave. We didn't run. They are forcing us to disappear. Ethan's fingers tightened around the page. Beneath it, tucked carefully into the back of the drawer, was a small notebook. He opened it slowly, aware that crossing this line meant there would be no returning to ignorance. The entries were dated, written in a woman's hand. The script was neat but tense, each line pressed firmly into the page. She wrote of fear, of watching the road from the window, of lowering her voice even when alone. She wrote of her son, his cough, his questions, the way he asked when he could go outside again. She wrote of a man who would not bend, who believed that doing the right thing still mattered, even when it became dangerous. One line stopped Ethan cold. "We built the room for him. The dog stays with him when the noise starts. He listens better than we do." Ethan closed his eyes. A fragment surfaced then, uninvited, sharp. A hallway too narrow for full gear. A command given without context. A directive to secure the perimeter and ask no questions. The memory dissolved before he could grasp it fully, leaving behind only a familiar ache. This was the rehook of realization, the point where uncertainty tipped into belief. The room was not a theory anymore. It was evidence. And Rex's presence here was no coincidence. Ethan looked at the dates again. They aligned perfectly with a period of his service marked by blank space in his records. Training exercises that never quite made sense. Orders that ended abruptly. A reassignment he'd never questioned because questioning had never been encouraged. Rex shifted slightly, pressing closer to the wall, his body curling inward protectively, as if sheltering something that was no longer there. Ethan reached out and rested his forehead briefly against the cool concrete, grounding himself in the physical reality of the space. "I don't remember," he said softly, the words echoing faintly. "But you were here." Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and heavy. Ethan rose and continued reading. The final entries grew frantic. Ink smeared where the writer's hand had shaken. Names were referenced only indirectly. Positions, authority. A sense of being trapped by something vast and faceless. The last page ended mid-sentence. Ethan closed the notebook carefully and placed it back where he'd found it. He did not search further. Not yet. Some truths demanded patience. He stood in the center of the room and let his light sweep across it one final time. The bed, the toys, the drawings, the quiet. This was not a place meant for adults. It was a refuge built by people who believed that innocence could be protected, even from systems designed to erase it. Rex remained where he was, eyes half-lidded now, exhaustion pulling at him in a way Ethan had never seen. Whatever role he had played here, it had ended badly. Ethan climbed the stairs slowly, leaving the hidden room untouched. He slid the door closed behind him, careful to align it exactly as it had been. The wardrobe remained where it was, unmoved now, as though nothing beneath it had ever existed. But everything had changed. Above ground, the house felt different. Quieter, somehow, but also heavier. Ethan gathered his gear and waited until Rex followed, the dog pausing once at the top of the stairs to glance back before turning away. They did not leave the property that day. Some things, Ethan understood now, could not be rushed. And some rooms, once found, demanded to be remembered before they could be revealed. The drive back from the mountains felt longer than it should have, as if the road itself were reluctant to let Ethan leave with what he now carried inside him. Rex lay in the back seat, unusually still, his head resting against the door, eyes open but unfocused. He did not sleep. He watched the passing trees with the quiet endurance of someone reliving a memory rather than observing a landscape. Martha Hale lived 2 hours south, in a low, pale building tucked between a pine grove and a river that moved too slowly to make noise. Assisted living, the sign said, though there was nothing assisted about the way Martha met the world. Ethan had not seen her in years, but when she opened the door, he recognized her immediately. She was shorter than he remembered, or perhaps he had grown larger in memory, but her posture was unchanged, straight-backed, balanced, grounded. Her hair, now fully gray, was pulled into a tight knot at the nape of her neck, and her skin carried the fine lines of someone who had spent decades under fluorescent hospital lights rather than sun. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, softened only slightly when they found Ethan's. "You came," she said, her voice calm, as if she had expected nothing else. Ethan nodded once. Rex stepped forward and sat neatly at his side, ears relaxed but alert. Martha's gaze dropped to the dog, lingering longer than polite curiosity would require. "He's older," she said, "but still working." "He always is," Ethan replied. She stepped aside to let them in. The apartment was spare but immaculate, the kind of order that came from habit rather than control. A small table by the window held a single-framed photograph turned face down. Ethan noticed, but did not comment. They sat across from each other, silence settling between them without discomfort. It was Martha who broke it, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You found the place," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You knew." Martha inhaled slowly, then exhaled, as if steadying herself against a weight she had been carrying for a long time. "I knew it was still there. I didn't know if anyone would ever go looking." Rex shifted, his claws clicking softly against the floor. Martha's eyes flicked to him again, something like regret passing through her expression. "There was a family," she continued. "Not refugees, not criminals, just people who stood in the wrong place when the wrong men decided something belonged to them." She spoke carefully, choosing words that avoided names, as though speaking them aloud might still summon consequences. She explained that years ago, she had been asked to assist with a temporary relocation. Medical support, paperwork, nothing official. A family needed to disappear quickly. For their own protection, she'd been told. The request had come through a back channel, one she trusted at the time. "The operation never existed on paper," Martha said. "No signatures, no chain of command. That's how they kept it clean." Ethan listened, still, every muscle taut. Rex lay down at his feet, his presence steadying. "There were local players involved," Martha went on. "Land disputes, money, influence, and military oversight that knew how to look the other way when it suited them." She paused, then added, "Not everyone agreed." That was the rehook moment, the shift in the room that Ethan felt before she spoke the name. Colonel James Rourke. Ethan's brow furrowed. He remembered the name dimly. A senior officer, respected, old school. A man known for discipline and restraint, for believing that the uniform meant something beyond orders. Rourke had retired quietly, died a few years later, according to the sparse notices Ethan recalled. "He was the one who insisted the house remain," Martha said. "Not destroyed, not repurposed. Left alone. He called it a contingency, a place of record, in case the truth ever needed somewhere to land." She looked at Ethan directly now. He knew he couldn't stop what was happening, but he refused to erase it completely. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a subtle realignment. "The dog," he said. "Rex was there." Martha nodded. "He was assigned as protection, not yours, the child's." Her voice faltered for the first time. "He stayed with the boy when things got loud, when the fear got bad. Animals are better at that than we are." Rex lifted his head, ears angling toward Martha, as if recognizing her voice. She offered him a small, sad smile. "You were never meant to know," she said to Ethan. "Your role was perimeter security, logistics. You were injured shortly after. Concussion, heavy medication. They reassigned you before questions could form." "And my memory," Ethan said quietly. Martha nodded again. "Sometimes the mind does its own redacting." Ethan stood and paced the small room, the discipline in his movements barely containing the storm beneath. Pieces were aligning now, not into a full picture, but enough to reveal the shape of what had been hidden. He stopped by the window, staring out at the slow river. They didn't make it out, he said. It wasn't a question. Martha's silence answered him. The child did, she said finally. Not the way we hoped. Not clean, but alive. Ethan turned sharply. Where? I don't know, Martha admitted. Another woman handled that part. Social services, false identity, enough distance to survive. Rex rose then and moved closer to Martha, resting his head briefly against her knee. She reached down and touched his fur, her hand trembling slightly. He never forgot, she whispered. Ethan returned to his seat, the weight of what he'd learned pressing down, but no longer shapeless. It had edges now, direction. He understood why the house had been built the way it was, why it had been left to decay rather than destroyed, why Rex reacted not with fear, but with duty. Martha met his gaze again. You don't owe anyone anything, she said. Not anymore. Ethan thought of the room beneath the floor. The small bed, the drawings, the silence that had been trained to hold its breath. I know, he said, but someone does. Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and deliberate. They left an hour later. Outside, the air felt clearer, lighter, though nothing had changed. As Ethan opened the truck door, Martha touched his arm. Be careful, she said. The people who buried this didn't forget it. They just assumed no one would dig. Ethan nodded. He didn't look back as he drove away. Some truths, he knew now, waited for the right witnesses. And some loyalties outlasted the orders that created them. Ethan did not begin with questions. He began with documents. Back at the cabin, the table filled slowly with paper. Copies of old zoning permits, medical transfer logs, declassified fragments of operations that named no names and explained nothing. The forest pressed close outside the windows, but inside, the air felt sharper, edged with purpose. Rex lay near the door, rising only when Ethan moved, his presence steady, watchful. This was not investigation in the cinematic sense. It was patient alignment, the slow act of placing truth beside truth until a line emerged. Ethan learned to read the gaps first, where dates overlapped but details did not, where a child's medical intake appeared twice under different identifiers, where a transfer was authorized by someone who had no authority to authorize it. The pattern did not scream conspiracy. It whispered intention. The name surfaced quietly in a margin note, almost missed. Evelyn Brooks. Finding her took time. Evelyn Brooks had retired from state social services more than a decade earlier, her digital footprint thin by design. When Ethan finally located her address, it was a modest single-story home near the coast, paint faded by salt air, the yard carefully tended. Rex alerted before Ethan reached the door, ears forward, head angled slightly to the side, reading the house as if it were a living thing. Evelyn Brooks answered the door herself. She was in her early 70s, slight and upright, with silver hair cut short in a practical line that framed a face worn smooth by years of measured restraint. Her skin held the pallor of someone who spent more time under office lights than sun, but her eyes, clear, gray, unflinching, carried a depth Ethan recognized immediately. This was a woman who had learned to look at systems and see people where others saw numbers. Yes, she said, her voice even, guarded. Ethan introduced himself plainly. No rank, no history. Rex sat at his heel, posture perfect, eyes calm. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the dog, lingered there, then returned to Ethan's face. I don't give interviews, she said. I'm not here for one, Ethan replied. She studied him for a moment longer, then stepped aside. Come in. Her living room was spare, neat, defined by function rather than decoration. Framed certificates lined one wall. Degrees, commendations, service awards, most turned slightly askew, as if she had stopped caring how they looked long ago. A kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen. They sat across from each other, silence settling like an agreement. Ethan laid out the notebook from the hidden room, the folded plea, the dates. He did not speak until Evelyn reached for the papers herself, hands steady, fingers trembling only once. She closed her eyes when she saw the dates. "I wondered who would come first," she said quietly. "The journalist, or you." Ethan said nothing. Evelyn leaned back, the weight of memory pulling her shoulders downward. "The child came to me through a transfer that shouldn't have existed. The paperwork was clean on the surface, but the margins were wrong. The signatures were wrong. Someone wanted a mistake to happen." She looked at Rex then, something like recognition passing through her expression. "And you made sure it didn't." Evelyn explained how she had altered the intake quietly, changed the name, rerouted the placement. She had done it once before, she admitted. Maybe twice. Enough to know how easily a life could disappear inside a system that measured success by efficiency. "The boy survived," she said. "He's a man now, has a life. He does not know the whole truth. I never gave it to him." "Where is he?" Ethan asked. "Close enough to feel ordinary," Evelyn replied. "Far enough to stay safe." That was the rehook. The moment Ethan felt the story tilt from recovery to responsibility. The truth existed. It breathed. And it could be harmed. Ethan did not push. He gathered the documents and thanked her. As they stood, Rex moved toward the door, paused, then turned his head sharply, ears snapping forward. His body stiffened. Ethan followed the dog's gaze to the window. A car sat across the street, engine idling, driver obscured by glare. When Rex growled, low and controlled, the car pulled away. Evelyn watched it go, her mouth set in a thin line. "They don't forget," she said. Neither did Rex. The following weeks passed in motion. Ethan tracked down old clerks, retired officers, records stored in boxes no one had opened in years. He listened more than he spoke. When people hesitated, Rex's presence softened the room. Something about the dog's quiet attention eased defenses words could not. Several times, Ethan noticed he was being watched. Once, he found his cabin door ajar. Another time, a trail marker he had set was gone. Rex found him each time, steady and alert, placing himself between Ethan and whatever threat lingered unseen. When the pressure began to weigh on him, when the pull toward the house returned with insistence, Ethan drove back to the forest. He stood outside the cabin there, the hidden room sealed once more beneath the floor, and hesitated. Rex walked ahead and stopped at the door, standing squarely in the threshold. He would not move. Ethan understood then. Not everything was meant to be reopened. Some places were anchors, not gateways. The house was not asking for action. It was asking for witness. Ethan turned away. The final step was not his. He contacted a journalist, Daniel Hollis, a man known for patience rather than spectacle. Hollis was tall and spare, with graying hair at the temples and eyes that had learned to weigh truth against consequence. He listened without interruption, asked few questions, and when he did speak, it was with care. "This isn't a crime story," Hollis said finally. "It's a map." Ethan handed over the documents, all of them. Rex lay at his feet, eyes half closed, finally at rest. Ethan did not attend the interviews that followed. He returned to the mountains. He did not seek resolution. He had chosen his role, to deliver truth to someone who could carry it further without breaking it. One evening, as the sun fell behind the trees, Rex sat beside him on the porch, posture relaxed. For the first time in weeks, the dog's breathing was easy. Instincts, Ethan knew now, did not forget. They waited, and when the moment came, they guided the hand that needed to act and held it back when action would do harm. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came, the way real things often did, piecemeal, cautious, burdened by footnotes and hesitation. Daniel Hollis published the first article without names, without accusations sharp enough to draw blood. He wrote about land quietly reassigned, about records altered in ways that did not benefit the public, about a family that vanished without ever truly leaving. The tone was restrained, almost clinical, but the effect was immediate. People recognized the shape of the story, even when the details were blurred. Recognition has a way of traveling faster than certainty. Ethan read the article alone at the cabin, the paper folded carefully on the table. Rex lay nearby, older now in ways that could not be measured by years alone. His muzzle had lightened, the black fur softened with gray, but his posture remained composed, his presence steady. When Ethan finished reading, he did not feel triumph. He felt release, the quiet easing of a long-held breath. More pieces followed. A second article, then a third. Names began to appear. Not all of them. Not enough to satisfy anger, but enough to anchor the truth to the world. Some of the men implicated were already dead. Others were too insulated by time and position to be reached by consequence. The justice that arrived was imperfect, incomplete. But it was real in the ways that mattered most. The family's name was restored, not as a headline, not as a scandal, as a record. A public acknowledgement followed, brief and careful in its wording. An apology issued by a committee that no longer resembled the one that had made the original decisions. It did not undo what had been done, but it marked the place where denial ended. For the first time, the silence surrounding the house was broken by something other than fear. The Land Commission moved slowly, as institutions do when they sense scrutiny. The house was surveyed, documented, then quietly designated as a protected site. Not a monument to wrongdoing, but a location of historical significance. A place where a life had been preserved long enough to continue elsewhere. Survival, not suffering, was the word used in the final report. Ethan returned to the forest on a clear autumn afternoon, the air crisp with pine and fallen leaves. The house looked the same as it always had, weathered, leaning slightly into the hill, patient. But something about it felt lighter, as though it had been holding tension for decades and was only now learning how to let go. Rex walked more slowly now, his gait measured, joints stiff in the mornings. Ethan matched his pace without thinking. They entered the house together, not as intruders this time, but as caretakers. Sunlight filtered through the windows, dust motes drifting lazily in the air. The hidden room beneath the floor had been cleaned weeks earlier, not erased, just tended. The bed remained. The toys remained. Everything was exactly where it had been, preserved with respect rather than secrecy. Ethan sat on the floor near the wall and rested his back against it, closing his eyes. Rex lowered himself beside him, their shoulders touching. The quiet felt earned. A knock sounded above them. Ethan opened his eyes, heart steady. Footsteps approached, measured, hesitant. He rose and climbed the stairs, Rex following more slowly. The man standing in the doorway was in his early 40s, tall but lean, his posture uncertain, as if unused to taking up space. His hair was dark, streaked lightly with gray at the temples, and his skin carried the weathered tone of someone who spent time outdoors but avoided attention. His eyes were the color of riverstone, observant, guarded. He wore simple clothes, nothing that suggested authority or ambition. "I was told you might be here," the man said. Ethan studied him carefully, not with suspicion, but with patience. "My name is Michael," the man continued. "Michael Turner. At least, that's the name I've lived with." Rex stepped forward. He did not bark. He did not rush. He approached Michael slowly, head lowered slightly, tail relaxed. When Rex reached him, he stopped and looked up, their eyes meeting. For a moment, the world narrowed to that exchange. Michael's breath caught. He dropped to one knee without understanding why, his hand hovering uncertainly before resting against Rex's neck. The dog leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly. "I knew," Michael said softly. "I didn't know how, but I always knew there was more." Ethan said nothing. This was not his moment to shape. They sat together in the house, speaking in careful increments. Ethan explained what he could without overwhelming. Michael listened without interruption, his expression shifting between disbelief and recognition. He spoke of growing up with gaps in his memory, of an unnamed fear that surfaced in enclosed spaces, of a sense of loyalty he could never quite explain. He had built a life, a good one. He did not want it undone. Ethan understood. "I'm not here to change anything," Ethan said. "Only to tell you the truth. You decide what to do with it." Michael nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." The rehook came quietly, in a moment that could easily have been missed. As Michael stood to leave, Rex followed him to the door and stopped. He turned back once, looking at the room beneath the floor, then at Ethan. His tail lifted slightly, then settled. A goodbye, not just to a place, but to a role fulfilled. In the weeks that followed, Ethan returned to the cabin for the last time. He packed lightly. Rex watched from the porch, his breathing slow and even. They drove away together, not because the place had lost its meaning, but because it no longer needed guarding. Time passed gently. Rex aged with dignity. His movements slowed, his hearing dulled, but his presence remained unwavering. On their final walk together, they stopped at the edge of a meadow as the sun dipped low. Ethan sat beside him, one hand resting on the dog's broad back. "You did good," Ethan said. Rex's tail thumped once, content. When Rex passed, it was quietly, without struggle. His head in Ethan's lap, the world softening around them. Ethan did not feel broken. He felt complete. He returned once more to the forest, standing before the house that had started it all. A small plaque stood near the path now, its wording simple, unadorned. Ethan read it, then turned away. The house no longer waited. It had been found, and Ethan understood, finally, what Rex had been teaching him all along. He had not been saved. He had been guided, back to a place where truth mattered, where silence ended, where his life fit not as a weapon, but as a witness. He left the forest with steady steps, carrying nothing but what he was meant to keep. Sometimes, what we call a miracle does not arrive as light from the sky or a voice we can hear. Sometimes, it comes as a quiet instinct, a loyal heart, a path that keeps calling us back until we are ready to listen. Perhaps God does not always remove the darkness from our lives. Perhaps He gives us companions who can see through it when we no longer can. A dog who refuses to leave, a memory that survives silence, a truth that waits patiently for the right soul to carry it into the light. In our everyday lives, we may not walk through forests or uncover hidden rooms, but we all face moments when something inside us says, "Do not turn away." Those moments are not accidents. They are invitations. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from or what this story reminded you of. And if you believe even quietly that small acts of faith still matter, consider subscribing to Silent Paws Steady Hearts. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He place loyal souls beside you when the road grows heavy. And may you always find the courage to listen when love, faith, or truth gently calls your name.